know, like when you take a drug and there's a warning on the label. So they said, you know, we're going to bring you a scientist, but you don't have to know the science, right? So they've been very generous with my time here today. They've given me 45 minutes to talk pure science. I'm going to use a lot of technical terms, and I'm going to drive the translators crazy. But their reminder was very good, you know. Why am I here? Why do they bring a scientist to talk to you? I have 45 minutes, and is it about continuing education for your advanced degree in genetics? Is that why you're here today? They touched on a very important point. You don't have to know the science. But in order to have the greatest amount of not only enthusiasm and integrity, but passion about what you do, you have to know that it's true, right? You have to know that the science is real. So the goal today, I hope we can agree, is not to become geeks or to be too entrenched in the science and feel that that has to be a part of your business, but rather, I would expect that you have some degree of confidence, that you've done your homework, you've at least come to meetings like this, you've heard the scientists firsthand, and you walk away saying, you know, maybe I didn't understand all of that, I understood some of it, but I learned enough to know that the science is true, that the company is really putting their effort in science as they develop these products. So do we agree that that's the main goal? All right. So first of all, who are we? You know, it's important to know who we are. We are an anti-aging company, and everything that we do is about how we age well. And it's been really fun coming back here. It's been maybe more than a year since I've been here, and it's been a few years since I've seen some of you. And I actually walked past some of you last night at the meet and greet because I didn't even recognize how good you look. Some people have lost some weight and look 10 years younger. Christian, you know, who I hung about with a couple of years ago, I barely recognized him. Doesn't he look great? Yeah. So it's not just your skin, but your whole body and your youthfulness. That's what we're about. And you see this diagram a lot, and I know there are a lot of you who are new. What does this mean? It's really about the sources of aging. You can cover the signs and symptoms of aging maybe quite easily. Just put a little spackle on your face. If you're feeling low in energy, drink some caffeine, a Red Bull or something, right? Then you act young, look young again. Is that the right approach? No, that's the gray arrow on the diagram. What we need to do is go to the sources of aging. We need to understand the science of why we age so that we can actually slow that process. We need to understand it. So I want to give an overview today of where we've been. I've been with the company 17 years now. Where have we been when it comes to anti-aging? Have we always been anti-aging? And where are we now, and what does the future hold? And I know that you're all very curious about gamma, about TR90. I'm not going to talk mostly about that today. But for those of you who are new, I'm going to put it into perspective that will help you to understand why this is so darn exciting. Okay, so first of all, nutrition science. That's where we began 17 years ago when I was attracted to this company out of the National Cancer Institute. I was very interested in this area, and my thoughts and the company's aligned. Nutrition and its importance in aging. Why is this important? Let's look at nutrition around the world, and it's kind of interesting to see what people are eating. Here's the Ahmed family of Egypt, and this is what they eat in a week. And if you have to look kind of hard to see a nutrition label amongst those things, right? A prepackaged food. There's a lot of fruits and vegetables there. When you move further west, here's the Melander family in Germany. It's getting a little harder to find the fruits and vegetables, isn't it? But I think the king of bad nutrition has to come from the United States, right? Here's the Rivas family of North Carolina, and this is what they eat in a week. And now, it's really hard to find some fruits and vegetables, isn't it? Maybe there's some tomato on the pizza, certainly a lot of soft drink, a lot of takeaway food. What do you think this means? As we have moved away from the basics, the fruits and vegetables and all those things, towards pre-packaged and prepared and salted and fatted and tastes good and is very quick. What is that doing to our bodies? And as you understand nutrition, it's about nutrient density, not caloric density, right? Those micronutrients that are in the food, by that I mean the vitamins, the minerals, those are very important for sustaining all of the biochemical reactions of life. They are cofactors. So we have enzymes that catalyze reactions in the body, but they are like Pac-Man with no teeth. The vitamins and the minerals are actually the teeth for those enzymes to work properly. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But you've never really thought that they're about aging, did you? But there's a scientist named Bruce Ames, and he's a very famous scientist. Every food that you eat is one of the first tests that happens is the Ames test to make sure that those ingredients or food additives do not damage the DNA. And he, in the last decade, has done a very nice systematic study that shows that marginal deficiencies in even the most basic of nutrients, like the B vitamins, can actually cause you to be on a path of accelerated aging. Why? Why is that? He's written some papers on this. And what he has shown is that if you don't get quite enough of these basic nutrients, then your body has to make a decision. It has to make a decision about whether or not to keep you alive today or keep you alive in the long term. And of course, what's the decision? It will channel those nutrients into the processes that will keep you alive today, your energy and other things. But this is at the expense of long-term survival. So it's a little bit like your car. You can fill it with petrol every day and it will get you where you need to go. If you don't have enough budget for the oil change, for the tire change, for the air filter change, sure, your car will continue to get you back and forth from work, but it is going to age much faster, right? And it will die younger. Is that right? Now, our goal, my goal in this anti-aging business of ours is to die young, as late in life as possible. Right? So, let's put nutrition science in this anti-aging circle. It becomes the first thing. It is very important, it's basic, it will never go away. Now, what's the next thing that you might put in this big circle? Well, the science of free radicals. This is probably the most well understood, right? Free radicals and antioxidants. We know that these free radicals damage the cell membranes, they damage the DNA, they cause you to age faster. We've heard of antioxidants and free radicals, right? Yeah, I'm speaking to people who know. And I've got to say, 20 years ago, just before I joined Nu Skin, this was fairly new science. Now we all understand. So we also understand that, you know, the environmental toxins like the cigarette smoke and the exhaust, they generate free radicals that are very bad for us. But it's also important to understand that some of these free radicals are generated from inside the body during the metabolism process, especially as we age. So we'll talk more about these mitochondria later and what happens to them as we age. So this is a very well-established science now. There are lots of books and papers that have been published that show that this is very much an important part of the aging paradigm. How do we fight this? With antioxidants, right? So it's very important to get the antioxidants that we need from a diet rich in fruits and vegetables, and also from LifePak or other very solid nutritional supplements. So these antioxidants work together. Here's an example of vitamin E, protecting the cell membrane because it's lipid soluble, and also protecting the DNA in its membrane. And then you have water soluble antioxidants like vitamin C, and they work together to protect the cells and slow the aging process. So let's put antioxidants in the circle of anti-aging. And this, I think, this is great history. This will never go away. We have brilliant products that the company has formulated, and we have really become masters at this particular aspect of science. So it's important then to also go back to some of the basics. what about these vegetables and the chemicals that are found in them? Here's a picture of some early vegetarians returning from the kill. And we could learn something from these early vegetarians. So as we've studied these micronutrients, and as we've studied these antioxidants, over the last decade or so, we've learned some new things, especially about the plant chemicals. Because many of those that we thought were just acting as antioxidants, like the beta-carotene carotenoid, you know, the orange one, or the lycopene carotenoid, the red one, or the flavonoids, like the ones we get in green tea or other fruits and vegetable skins and even the seeds. We've learned that they do more than just act as antioxidants, but they actually somehow influence the way that the brain of the cell, the DNA, interacts with the rest of the body. So here's the vitamin E and here's the vitamin C, and as I said, we previously thought that these other phytonutrients were simply acting as antioxidants. I'm going to show you that they're doing much more than that. Oh, and by the way, hasn't the scanner been a fantastic tool in helping us to understand, are we getting enough of these phytonutrients? Because our cells need to be colorful, just like that last picture. So this is like a Salvador Dali painting, isn't it? Or it's like autumn. How do we get our cells to look like this and to be the most healthy? Our food should look like this, lots of color. And our supplements should contain those important phytochemicals. So we've developed products along this line to fulfill those two circles, right? But, as I was saying, these plant chemicals seem to be doing much more than just being antioxidants. And this is where the next frontier of health and anti-aging lies, I'm convinced. We live in a world of edible plants, and our bodies have adapted to that. We don't think about it very often, but some animals don't need vitamin C. They create it in their bodies. And perhaps we could do that once too. But we have become so dependent upon the plants that we eat that our bodies decided, you know what? We don't need to make vitamin C anymore because the diet that we're eating is providing it for us. Think of all of the other interactions that are going on with this world of edible plants and these chemicals that come from the plants that maybe we don't appreciate. And what are they doing? Let me give you an example of how these chemicals can actually program our cells from the inside out by affecting the DNA, not the code, but the expression of that code. I've put a carrot up here, outside a cell. The carrot provides beta-carotene, a carotenoid that you find in nature that is orange. When the carotenoid is present, if it's oxidized, then that carotenoid sends a message to the nucleus of the cell. The nucleus then upregulates the production of the proteins that fight free radicals, some of those endogenous proteins that we have, like catalase. Isn't that interesting? So the beta-carotene is acting as a sensor for stress in the cell, and then training the cell through the gene expression to produce the proteins that it needs to fight that stress. Isn't that amazing? Let me give you another really good example. Here's a cell, and this is the cell of the body. There are about 100 trillion cells in your body. Cells don't like to be alone, right? They're like people. They need to live in a community. So let's give him some friends here. Here's a group of cells, and this might be in your liver cells, it might be muscle cells, it doesn't matter. But did you know that the cells have molecules on the surface called gap junction proteins? And these help small molecules to travel back and forth between the cells. This is one of the ways that cells communicate with one another. And it's interesting that cancer cells have far fewer of these gap junction proteins. So, if I was to translate it into layman's terms, cells are actually French kissing all the time. Right? They're passing knowledge, passing fluids back and forth amongst each other. There we go, they're kissing again. All right, so So what does this have to do with phytochemicals? Well, the tomato is red, and it's red because it has a carotenoid that's red called lycopene, yeah. And it's interesting, but in the presence of lycopene, for some reason, cells actually contain more of these gap junction proteins. They become much more kissy, right? That's a really interesting observation, isn't it? Because here we are learning then that these antioxidants, what we thought were antioxidants, and these other plant chemicals are more than just antioxidants. They are actually able to influence the way that our DNA expresses itself and creates molecules that help the cells to adapt and survive and to act normally. So then the question arises, and it arose for us a few years ago. What is the role of gene science in this anti-aging circle that we are trying to build? How much influence does it have on how we age? This is the next frontier. So let me give you some basics on the genes then, for those who can't remember from high school or university. If you look at a cell, there's a section in the middle there called the nucleus, the gray area, and that's where the DNA is found. And you see it here in the form of these chromosomes. So sometimes there's a little bit of a misunderstanding. What's the difference between a chromosome, DNA, and a gene? So let me quickly explain that for you. So here's the difference. A strand of DNA in each cell is about 3 meters long. So if you can imagine something that is so thin that you can't even see it, but it's 3 meters long, and it's packed into the nucleus of a cell that is much smaller than the tip of a needle, how does it not get tangled up? Right? Because parts of it have to be exposed so that it can then be translated into the protein. The instructions are there to build a protein. There are about 25,000 genes, and the cell needs to be able to keep track of this. So it actually wraps the DNA around these spools, like cotton spools, and that's why you get this structure called the chromosome. But if you unravel it, then you get the strand of DNA. And in sections along the DNA are the genes. Now let's be clear. The DNA is fixed for life. It doesn't change. But the expression, as it opens itself up, it has instructions to build those proteins, like the antioxidant proteins, or like the structural proteins like collagen. That can change. So, to help us understand aging in the context of genetics, we made some fantastic relationships. In trying to understand the role of genes in aging, we saw many different approaches. And for us, most of them didn't really seem, they were very interesting, but when you really looked at it from a genuine point of view, even though some other companies were capitalizing on that as part of their story of nutrition and genes, they weren't really 100% applicable for us. We wanted to have legitimate science that really explained aging and genetics. We came across some papers that were written by this fellow, Richard Weinrich, who's a gerontologist. He's been studying aging for more than 30 years. And unlike other people who study aging, he wasn't just looking at the descriptive biology. In other words, when you age, you seem to forget things. So we will document what happens in the brain to help you understand what is going to happen to you when you age. Or maybe a dermatologist who studies aging who says, when you age, your skin gets more wrinkled. We can help to describe that process so you understand why you are getting wrinkles. The approach is interesting academically, but we want to know how to change that, right? And that's what's very different about Richard Weinrich, is he has been studying nutrition and how that affects the aging process. So unlike most of the other scientists who study aging, Dr. Weinrich was interested in learning how to slow it down. Well, he's a famous anti-aging scientist and has been used by most of the major networks in TV and print whenever a topic of aging comes up. Here's an interesting fellow, Tom Proller. Used to work in Lester Packer's lab, He's a cancer geneticist, but in his heart of hearts, he's always been interested in the genetics of aging. So when they ended up at the same institution in Madison, Wisconsin, Thomas Proller went straight to Weinrich and said, we need to collaborate. There's a new technology, it's called the gene chip. And this gene chip can measure the pattern of gene expression for all 25,000 genes in the human, or the monkey, or the mouse. This is amazing because it's able to measure the work output of all of those 25,000 genes in one experiment. And he went to Weinrich and said, we can combine the science of gene expression technology and aging by using, in experiments, the gene chip to measure the pattern of gene expression in young, and then the pattern of gene expression in genetically identical old individuals. And if we look at the difference, we can find out which gene expressions are changing as you age. Are you with me? Right. So that's when they published a paper which essentially said we can measure aging at the genetic level. We have found a group of genes that do change as you age. And once you have that, now you have the ability to test for ingredients that might change that pattern of gene expression that you have identified back to a more useful pattern. When Joe Chang called Dr. Weinrich on the phone, they said they'd be happy to talk to us. A week later, they were sitting in the boardroom on the 9th floor with us, the scientists, and at that time, I remember turning to Joe and I said, Joe, this is the gene expression science that we've been looking for. This is the connection between aging and genetics that we have been trying to find. And the rest is a little bit of history. We've been working with them. We finally bought that company and have done a lot of very important work. So let's show you a little bit of what we did with that. Of course, we worked with skin and we looked at gene expression changes in the skin, but my expertise is not in skin, but rather in cell biology. So our first problem was, as you age, how do you start to feel inside? I already touched on it earlier. You need more and more coffee, right? You lose the energy that you once had. The exuberance of youth is starting to leave. Well, on a cell biology level, of course you look to the source of energy. And the source of energy in the body and in the cell is a subcellular organelle called the mitochondria. This is where ultimately all of the food material that you eat is broken down and is fed to the mitochondria and mixed with oxygen to create energy for the cell, for the brain, for the muscle, for the liver, for the heart. Okay, so these are like little nuclear power plants in the cell. And it has been well defined that as you age, the efficiency of those little engines declines, much like a car that gets old. And as it declines, it also produces more exhaust, more smoke, that then starts to contribute to the free radical damage that ages you even more. So this is a great place to start, don't you think? Let me show you a video that will help you to understand that this is real. Here's a video of a cell. And you see in the center part there, that's the nucleus. That is where the DNA is stored. But look at that green, those little green worms. This is a live cell stained for mitochondria. So these are the live mitochondria in the cell. They are about 200 to 500 per cell. They are creating the energy for you, but they are aging. As you age, the mitochondria seem to be aging. So we had to identify, using this technique from LifeGen that we learned, which are the genes that make and create the mitochondria. And if we look at those genes, which ones change as we age? So in this experiment, there are 52 genes from top to bottom that we identified that actually change as the mitochondria age. So the level of expression changes. Some things are turned up, some things are turned down. This is a change associated with age. So once we've identified those genes that change as we age, that make the mitochondria, that's step one. What's the next step? We have to test for ingredients that somehow will change this old expression back to the young expression pattern, right? Because now essentially we've identified aging of the mitochondria at the genetic level. Now we have a pattern to seek after. So let's show you an experiment where we did 5 different ingredients and tested in old individuals for 3 months to see if it would turn back the genetic clock for mitochondria. Which ingredient do you think has done the job? Yeah, ingredient 4 clearly has done a big, it hasn't changed it identically back, but it sure has changed a lot of those genes that started to lower in expression back to a higher level of expression. And likewise, those ones at the bottom that are expressing lower as you age, it has helped to turn them back on, so that now these genes are expressing themselves properly in order to create and maintain younger mitochondria. Because remember, the gene products for each of these things are proteins that are part of the structure of the mitochondria. So, ingredient 4 would be a great one to choose as part of our, in this case, vitality formulation. We looked at other ingredients as well, and those ones that were the most promising, we then used in this formulation. It's important to understand that I've simplified this somewhat. Let's go to the next level of complexity, and that is that there are lots of different tissues in the body, right? We have the brain, important for cognitive function, and the mitochondria in the brain and the expression of the mitochondria is very important. We have the heart, the muscle, all of those things. So we need to investigate those tissues. And it seems that the different phytochemicals, the different plant chemicals, affect the gene expression in those different tissues slightly differently. And that's why you can't just pick one ingredient. We actually have 3 ingredients in vitality. All right, so there you go. Similar, we've turned back the hands of time for the mitochondria. Now, once we've done all of that work, it seems a little bit academic. It's nice to be able to then go back and test and see if it actually does change the function and how energy is being produced in the body. And here's a simple test, just mice on a treadmill. Happy mice that have been trained to run. And these mice are, I have a lot of rapport with these mice because they love to run marathons. And so you put them on these little treadmills and they run their little heart outs, and if you've ever seen a mouse, they love to run, their little tails are wagging behind them. And these trained mice, you can see that if you run them to exhaustion, they go for about 25 minutes. So their marathons don't last as long as mine do. But they are about the same here, control and at week 5. Now, if you feed these guys some of the ingredients that we identified for mitochondria with the age-lock science, after 5 weeks, these guys are able to run on the treadmill much longer. That's pretty impressive, isn't it? Yes. So, that's a good confirmation that it's working. Now, I'm really interested in the concept of the hybrid car, and Europe is really leading the way in getting very fuel-efficient cars, diesels that get very high mileage and run very well. It's also important if you're retuning the mitochondria, it's sort of like retuning your engine. So let's look at it from that perspective. We have here an example of trained mice. All these guys can run a marathon in a heartbeat. They're very fit mice. But we're going to give these guys on the left a day off. So they don't have to run today, but we're going to measure the fuel in their muscle. It's glycogen. It's the basic sugar form that's going to feed those mitochondria and help the mouse to run. Now the mouse who was exercised, so he did his little half marathon, you can see he's used up some of the fuel, right? Used up a little bit more than half of his fuel to run this half marathon. Because at the end of his exercise, we measure how much fuel is left in the muscle, and he's used some up. So he's just like a normal car that's using gas. Now what about the guys who are fed vitality for 5 weeks? Let's look at how much fuel is left in their tanks after they've run the same distance as the exercise control. They've used less fuel. That's a great observation. This is exciting to us because we know about mitochondria and we know that they're hybrid cars. They actually run on fat as a fuel and on carbohydrate as a fuel, or glucose. And it turns out that the younger mitochondria, the mitochondria of a young individual is not so fussy. It'll use fat or carbohydrate, no problem. It's much more hybrid. As you age, it seems that the mitochondria prefer to have sugar as a fuel. Maybe it's a part of the aging process that makes them less efficient, and they just say, you know what, this is the kind of gas I prefer. Okay? What's happening here is, there's no miracle to this. What is shown that there's more glycogen in the muscle. That means that these mitochondria must have used a little more fat as they have generated the energy that they need for the mice to run their little marathon. So definitely turning back the hands of time. Now here's the final thing. This is a human pilot study that we did on 40 individuals. The brain is really important. In fact, those people who study dementia and problems with the brain, they have experimental models that help the brain to sort of revert to these disease states. And one of those key models is really just to tweak and to damage the mitochondria in the brain. The brain is extremely sensitive to any changes in the efficiency of the mitochondria. And this may be why, as we age, we start to forget things. We forget our children's names. Imagine my problem. I have 8 children, and 3 of the girls all begin with S, and it's all over the place. We forget where we put our keys, right? I've met some amazing people at this meet and greet last night. Several of you, many of you, speak several languages. They did a study last year. I mean, it's bad enough that you even speak one language, that as we age, we start to forget words, right? You're in the business where you're meeting people, you have to remember faces, you have to remember names, you have to remember the right word at the right time for your business, a little bit of science, a lot of business, right? What happens when you forget those words and you go, let alone that you speak 5 or 6 languages? A study came out last year, at the end of last year, that showed that by the time we're 50, we are measurably slower in our ability to recall words than someone who is 30. It's not that we eventually remember it and we always get it right, but it takes a little bit longer to remember. So how much of an advantage is it that your cognitive function is firing on all 8 cylinders? So this is a great study. Let me describe it to you. Tasks were given to these individuals. Some people were on a placebo that they thought was making them smarter. The other guys were on Vitality. And over a 12-week period, twice a week, they had to do these tasks on a computer to help them remember short-term memory tasks, executive decision making. I did these tests and they're quite difficult. They would flash up 8 cards, Ace of Hearts and Queen of Clubs and all these others. And then they would disappear. And then they would flash up a card and you'd have to say, was it there or not? Was it there or not? And how fast could you remember where it was? It was kind of a challenge. Now, over the period of 12 weeks, you see the guys that were on the placebo did quite well. Why did they improve? Yeah, training. It's important for you to train your brains, and that's what I love about this business. Is that you're always pushed a little bit past your comfort zone. You're learning new things all the time. Some of you are learning new languages, learning new terms and words and business practices. It's great to keep your brain active, and you will improve over time. But an advantage is nice too. And you can see that the guys that are on Vitality, by the time, just look at that first 2 or 3 weeks, the accelerated learning is statistically significant. And by the end of 12 weeks, there's about a 20% improvement. So it's really nice to see that this gene expression research is not just academic, but it actually leads to the formulation of meaningful products, isn't it? Well, we know. Thanks. There's another side that maybe is a little less obvious. The cell energy is important. But as we age, also cellular renewal and cleansing declines. That's something that maybe isn't quite so obvious, but it is just as important to the youthful structure of the cell. As time goes by, some of the machinery of the cell wears out. And when it wears out, it can't do its job. So there's a whole system in place in the cell that first identifies the worn out machinery, the old proteins that are starting to fray at the edges or whatever, and another system that actually then directs them for cleaning out, for recycling or elimination. So this whole system that's in the cell has been quite well defined, and as I mentioned, we know that as we age, that we become less good in the cell at being able to clear this. Let me describe it in another way. There's a certain toxic burden that you get. So Diedrich mentioned that in the food that you eat every year, there's about 4.5 kilograms of pesticide that is on the food that you sort of can't avoid. And your body has detoxification mechanisms, right? Now, as time goes by and as you get older, that doesn't change. We'll call that the external toxic load. It's still there. It still contributes to the total toxic load. It just may not change as you age. But the internal toxic load, it may change. As the mitochondria become less efficient, for example, then you get free radicals that then damage proteins faster. So that purple part of the bar is increasing as you age. And then the capacity of the cell to purify, to identify, and to recycle goes down as you age. So now you start to see a gap, right? A gap between what your body can handle in terms of the toxic load and how much is being placed upon it. So this is a very important part of the cell that we need to take care of if we want to have the full story of the anti-aging cell. And so, again, we use the same technique that I described for the first part, vitality, in R², now looking at cellular energy and purification, going beyond just the signs and the symptoms. Okay, we're not talking about colon cleanse here. We're talking about looking at the sources of aging in the cell, using this gene expression technique to help us feel recharged and renewed. And so we have a similar, what we would call a youth gene cluster, a heat map for the cellular purification youth gene clusters as we did for the cellular energy. And that's the age-lock science in a nutshell. Does that help you understand where we stand now with it? Good. Now remember, you don't have to be experts at the science. I hope that this hasn't left some of you new people here today feeling like, wow, I thought I came to a new skin convention and now I'm at a science convention and this is just way above me. The point is, you need to feel confident that the science is real. I invite you to investigate this, go to our website, become satisfied that you don't have to understand it 100%, but at least that you know that the science is real, that what we're doing is real. And I hope also that maybe you have jotted down a few notes that will help you to describe easily to your friends what this is all about. Let me help you with a couple. It would be important maybe to know that the science that Dr. Weinbrich and Dr. Prohler has done has helped us to measure aging at the genetic level. Maybe it's important to know that the patents that are on this science are based on science that goes back 30 years. 30 years of anti-aging and genetic research. Some simple things like that will pique people's interest is usually enough, rather than having to be an expert in the science. So here's our age-lock R², night and day. And I think I don't have to go into great detail about product usage, although I did have someone ask me last night, it seems like there's a whole lot of capsules in one, and at night there's not that many capsules. Do you really need a whole lot of ingredient to make it work? And if so, is the night really going to work? Because it doesn't seem like there's a lot there. This is just one simple principle that I'll just remind you of. The R² day contains a special ingredient that is truly amazing called Cordyceps sinensis. It's actually a type of a mushroom. And we have not identified, after all of the study that's been done on this marvelous ingredient for energy and stamina and now gene expression, we have never identified what is the part of that mushroom that is the active principle, so that we can pull out that active principle and give you 1 capsule instead of 6. We've never identified it. And since we haven't, we'll give you the full dose that the clinical studies show that you need, which seems like a lot, but this is more or less a food product with some amazing plant chemicals in there that are natural. On the other hand, those ingredients that we've chosen for R squared night, the cleansing and purification, we have actually identified those active principles, and that is what allows us to give it to you in a much smaller package. The time may come, now that we have gene expression science, that we can do the same for R squared day. So that's just a little tidbit there. So, we now are in a position that we can move the gene science back into this circle of healthy aging. We now have a story that is much more complete. And I would submit to you that anyone who is claiming to have an anti-aging strategy, who doesn't cover at least all 3 of these areas, really doesn't have the whole story. Now let me talk a little bit then. I think you're gaining an appreciation for how amazing this is. So what about TR90? I don't have any more slides to show you, but I just wanted to talk about that for a minute. Can you understand now what I've set up for you to help you to understand where TR90 is going to come from? We now understand aging principles. We are talking about targeting the sources of aging, but in order to help us to understand weight management a little better, it's also important to understand gene expression. What happens to gene expression, or what should be happening to gene expression in the fat tissue, in the muscle, and even in the brain? And how do we bring this science together to help us to understand weight management to give us an edge? Now, to help manage your expectations, there have been, I've heard some people say that Nu Skin has discovered the fat gene. And because we've discovered the fat gene, we have a magic ingredient that you'll take this pill, and no matter what you do, you're going to lose weight because the fat gene is going to work overtime for you and melt the fat while you're sleeping, right? I think if I came on stage and told you that, most of you are smart enough to know that that would be a cruel hoax, right? A marketing gimmick. What we have here is the nucleus of something really big. When I joined the company 17 years ago, one thing that intrigued me the most was that this was the only company that was really starting to get interested in the plant chemical side of the story. And that was, you know, we were somewhat naive back then. We used cabbage extract instead of using a pure sulforaphane derivative, right? So we went from using sort of a powder to using an extract after we had identified what those main principles are, and so on. So even though it started as a somewhat naive approach, it was a start, and we learned something, and it led to where we are today. We don't have all the answers yet in terms of gene expression technology, but I just want to testify to you that this is a very important start, that we have learned a lot, and that we've so far applied it very nicely to skin and to internal nutrition. And we are using some very nice science that we've identified in terms of gene expression of fat and muscle and even brain. Now, why the brain? Why is that important? And why would you be looking at gene expression of the brain? It's all about, partly about how we feel full and why we feel full. And that science is very important, right? Why do you feel satisfied? Or why do some people continue to crave after they've already eaten enough? And the fat, as we, you know, there's a fairly simple sort of a paradigm that people think about weight loss, right? It's all about how much goes in and how much you exercise. And the balance is how fat you'll get or how skinny you'll get. But we actually forget that there's another part of the equation, and that is the metabolic engine of the body. And as time goes by, I think Dietrich touched on it a little bit, but as time goes by, we'll explain more about this to you. But suffice to say that we're an anti-aging company. We now have this circle full, and we have a platform now that helps us to use gene expression science, the latest technology, to help us formulate products that are meaningful and that really have efficacy. I've shown you that today, And in the future, we'll be showing you more about how that affects the weight management system. Thanks very much, everyone.